All right, so we're going to take a look at this Reddit thread, right? And it's all about the predictions from 2019 about, well, the 2010s. It's kind of wild to see how their ideas panned out, compared to what really went down.
Yeah. It's almost like we're opening up this time capsule of different perspectives, right? And it's even more interesting because, this was posted right before everything like
Well,
changed.
so much happened after that, like it's crazy. But first, let's kind of set the scene, like what were people actually saying about the 2010s back then in 2019?
Well, fashion seems to be a big one. A lot of people were talking about skinny jeans and those like patterned button-down shirts. Oh, and the whole athleisure thing that was starting to become huge
Oh
E.
yeah, the era of yoga pants, like everywhere. And it's interesting because looking back, it feels like it wasn't just about comfort, right? It was more
Yeah.
like this cultural shift towards wellness and fitness being this like status symbol.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like we can see the beginnings of those crazy juice cleanses and all those fitness trackers we have now back then. Like health was something you like, showed off.
Did you feel that shift back then?
Oh, definitely. There was this like feeling that taking care of yourself meant you had to have this certain look. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And it wasn't just like fashion, right? Tech was changing everything so fast too.
Yeah, tons of people in the thread were talking about smartphones and social media like taking over. Actually, someone even predicted the death of like traditional media, you
Mm.
know, newspapers, broadcast TV, that kind of stuff.
And to be fair, they weren't that far off.
Yeah,
Like, think about how we get our news and entertainment these days. It's mostly streaming and social media, right?
exactly. And those were just getting started back in 2019.
I know.
It's kind of wild to see how quickly technology changed things in the 2010s, like our communication, relationships, everything. Remember those first dating apps that used swiping?
Oh, yeah. They were so new then.
Uh,
And now, like, it's just how everyone does it.
It makes you wonder what those Redditors would think about, like, TikTok.
Oh my God, it would blow their minds.
Right.
Okay, speaking of stuff that would have seemed unbelievable back then, people were talking about, like, the power of memes. Someone even joked about, like, meme wars happening in the future.
It's almost like they predicted it, you know? Because now memes are this powerful tool.
I know. They went from those kind of silly image macros to like ways to spread information, even manipulate people. It's kind of like humor and communication just totally merged in the digital world,
And those lines got blurry in ways people probably didn't even realize back then.
for sure. It definitely makes you think about like the responsibility that comes with that kind of influence. But before we get too deep into that,
Yeah, we should acknowledge that the 2010s weren't all like sunshine and
yeah.
roses.
Oh, absolutely not. The thread also has this sense of like anxiety and growing political divides. Remember that comment about people going from chill to like totally radicalized overnight?
Yeah, that was a big one. It's a reminder that the 2010s weren't just about, new gadgets and viral trends. It was a pretty intense time. Socially and politically, the world felt like it was in this constant state of, I don't know, like upheaval.
Yeah. There were comments about everything from like the switch from Obama to Trump in the US to the whole refugee crisis in Europe. Things were like turbulent everywhere, online, A&D, offline.
And it feels like that's continued into the 2020s, And it makes you think like maybe all that anxiety in 2019 was like a sign of things to come.
It really is fascinating how this one Reddit thread captures all of that, like the lighthearted stuff and the serious stuff.
Yeah, it paints a pretty complex picture, but before we like zoom out too much.
Right. Let's get into some of those specific moments and trends that really define the 2010s.
Oh, we got to talk about the whole doomer thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. That whole like feeling that everything was going downhill,
Mm.
like for sure. There were tons of comments about how people felt like so pessimistic about the future.
I know. One person even said like that people would look back on the 2010s and be like, those were the good old days,
Yeah.
just because the 2020s were going to be so much worse.
And it's crazy, right? Because looking back now, some of those predictions were like spot on.
It's kind of freaky. It makes
Yeah.
you think like, are we all just headed for some dystopia like those Redditors were worried about?
Okay, let's not get too dark. But the thread also had some of those like super weird, entertaining moments from the 2010s, right? Like remember the whole clown thing back in 2016?
Oh my God, how could I forget that? It was like straight out of some horror movie, like creepy clowns everywhere.
I know, right? Totally unsettling. And then like that same summer, there was Pokemon Go,
Ah, yes, the summer where everyone was glued to their phones, like walking around in parks, catching little virtual creatures.
right? It was kind of cool though. Like it was this shared experience, even if it was through, a screen.
Totally. And remember how people were like actually talking to each other, making friends while they were playing?
Yeah, it's this weird moment where it felt like, I don't know, tech was bringing people together.
Yeah. It's crazy how fast those trends like come and go, right?
Yeah.
But what was this huge global thing is now just like a distant memory.
It really shows how much the whole digital landscape can shift in like no time.
For sure. Speaking of shifts, remember all those remakes in Hollywood? Like Disney was remaking all their classic
Oh
movies.
yeah, the remake era. It was like every other movie was a reboot or a sequel.
And like some people hated it, right? They were like no originality, but others thought it was like comforting, a return to familiar stories.
I think it was like this deeper need for nostalgia,
Hmm.
you know, especially when things felt so uncertain and everything was changing so fast.
Yeah, for sure. Like the whole superhero movie thing too, right? That
Yeah.
just
Just exploded in the 2010s. Marvel and DC like ruling the box
I
office.
think it was this way of escaping, right? Into these big epic stories, heroes,
It
villains.
was like a way to deal with the real world by like going into this fantasy world.
Yeah, exactly. And those fantasies weren't just on the big screen, right? The thread also mentions like indie games and esports getting huge.
Gaming, yeah. It became way more than just a hobby in the 2010s. Like it was a real form of entertainment, a sport even.
I know. Some people made it their career.
It just shows how tech blurred the lines between different types of media and entertainment.
Totally. And those lines are like even blurrier now, right? But before we get too ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. Let's go back to that like original question. What will people remember about the 2010s? Like at the end of
Wow.
the day. It's tough to pick just one thing, right?
Mm.
It was such a decade of contradictions.
Yeah.
All the tech advancements, but also so much social unrest, cultural shifts, A&D political divides.
Mm.
But maybe that's what we'll remember. That feeling of constant change and not knowing what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like the 2010s were this time of like crazy transition. We were moving from the old to the new, right?
Right.
Figuring out the internet and social media, trying to make sense of a world that was more connected, but also somehow more divided.
And it feels like we're still dealing with all that today,
Oh,
right?
totally. Like we're still figuring out how to use tech without, losing ourselves in it, right?
Exactly. And maybe that's why looking back at the 2010s is so important.
Maybe.
Like it helps us understand how we got here.
Yeah, yeah. It gives us a way to think about the future, right?
There was this one comment that really stuck with me. Someone said looking back at 2019 is like watching the trailer for the movie we're all living in now.
Whoa. That's that's deep. But it's true.
I know, right?
Like it shows that the 2010s weren't just a bunch of random trends and stuff. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that's still going on.
So if you could go back to 2019, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
Hmm. That's a good one. I think I'd tell myself to like embrace the uncertainty, you know, be open to trying new things and remember that even when everything's changing, you can always learn and grow.
I like that. Like just go with it, even when things get a little crazy.
Exactly.
And maybe, put the phone down every once in a while.
Oh, for sure.
Like just appreciate what's happening right now.
Absolutely. Because, time really does fly, like we saw with this Reddit thread.
It really does.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive,
Yeah.
exploring this Reddit thread, thinking about the 2010s.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this trip down memory lane.